Hello, my name is Cheryl. Thanks for tuning into my channel. It's nice to see your lovely faces again, and this is going to be part 4 of the Black Lives Matter series. And in this video, we're going to be talking about what we can currently do to help end or fix police brutality and police racism in our communities. One thing that we hear a lot right now is that all cops are bastards. And this sentiment is being repeated a lot because one rotten apple ruins the bunch. Although every police officer may not lash out and react as violently as those police officers you see in George Floyd's instance or Breonna Taylor's instance, there are still those officers who stand by and don't do anything. And those officers who are too pussy to stand up and do something right when they see something being done wrong are not police officers we want to be serving our community. So the first thing that we push for as a community is the use of body cameras. If every police officer has a camera and they know that their initial moves are being documented and monitored, it not only discourages those initial perpetrators from doing those violent acts, it also gives bystanding police officers the confidence to intervene if they see fit. By having body cameras on everyone, there will be more reliable narratives to support people in court if they feel that they have been manipulated to say something that doesn't accurately represent the situation, or if the police try to give a different scenario. This holds accountable the initial victim, the initial police perpetrator, bystanding police officers who intervened, and civilians who intervened if they felt necessary, if the police officers weren't doing something. These sort of violent encounters don't happen every single time you have an encounter with a police officer, but there are really rotten apples that do exist in that bunch. And if those apples are bound to exist, you have to at least give the other police officers a chance to speak up and say something, and the confidence to speak up and say something. As of right now, several states don't require body cameras, and many police departments in Canada are equally as resistant to having body cameras. The next thing that we want to do is getting rid of all of the rotten apples. What this entails is having psychological testing implemented that are ongoing and performance-based. The reason we want these sort of tests implemented is so that we don't have instances like Derek Chauvin happening again. Derek Chauvin had 18 complaints that were filed against him, and they still let him out on the streets to serve the community. What needs to happen now is a review of existing complaints filed against police officers and to reinvestigate those complaints to fire overt repeating offenders so they don't walk out onto the streets and harm more innocent civilians. The next thing that we need to do is to track the problem. The existing data that exists out there right now isn't entirely accurate, and it doesn't accurately represent our population. Even with the existing data that is out there, those numbers vary across different sites depending on where you get them from. So what needs to happen now is that there needs to be a proper updated data collection that is publicly accessible through the Freedoms of Information Act, so records can be requested and provided through a third party. By having this done and having it in the hands of a third party, it takes away police transparency and holds them more accountable to do their jobs. When we talk about tracking the problem, this includes broader investigation of each shooting instance and its circumstances. By having a third party deal with all of this, they would be managing the calls that are made towards the police officers, all of the records that have been made, all of the notes that were made by police officers and their reports. This would also include follow-up reports, encounters with civilian and body camera footage, and everything else that can possibly be provided, but handled through a third party. The next step that we need to make is making sure that all of these offenders go to jail. Every case being brought up right now, we need to be keeping our eye out on and try to sign those petitions and make sure that there is proactive action to putting these police officers in jail or reprimanding them to the fullest degree that they deserve. We have to make sure that these police officers are being treated fairly based on the court of law to the full severity of their offense, so it discourages future offenders and the fact that they just deserve to be in jail. As of right now, it is August 28th, and the police officers that were involved in Breonna Taylor's shooting have not gone to jail, and they have not faced proper reprimand for the acts that they have committed. They legit straight up walked into someone's home and shot the two couple and killed someone who was a contributing part of society. And it wasn't even in their right to do so. They had gotten the wrong house, and they shot and killed an innocent woman. If we can't even get all of these guys in jail, other cops will always believe that they'll have a chance to get away with their crimes as well. Getting these guys out of the police force right now will be setting an example for future police officers to come. The next thing that we have heard talked about a lot in this situation is defunding and demilitarizing the police force. What this means doesn't mean completely chopping off all of their funds and making sure no police officers get pay, there aren't enough police officers where they need to be, and just lower protection in areas overall. What this means is making sure that they don't get extra funding that they don't necessarily need, and so that extra funding doesn't go towards militarizing. And by defunding and relocating this money, this means that this money will go towards different parts of our community that also need it, like education, public health care, mental health resources, and every other department in our communities that are lacking and underfunded. It is proven that police departments with more military equipment from the 1033 program will kill more people. These police officers do not need more money to be putting towards guns, armor, and military weapons. If they have the money to spend on new shiny guns and armor, then as the government, they have the funds to put towards proper follow-up, data collection, and investigation. But if proper follow-ups, data collection, and investigation are not things that they're capable of doing, money needs to be put towards that rather than new weaponry to use against civilians. As a citizen, you don't need to agree with all the policies that feed stupid amounts of money into military. Police don't need that money more than your children do for their education. Police don't need that money more than healthcare does. Police officers are not using the money properly, so you might as well put that money towards social welfare, things that benefit your community, things that go back towards you. If you're a citizen, you still have a voice. You can still vote. You can send letters to your local politicians, and you can sign petitions. The next thing we need to talk about is creating a third party to investigate misconducts and allegations made towards police officers. And when we talk about a third party, this third party should be combined with civilian oversight because people don't have much reason to believe in our government anymore. This third party should reinforce documentations and follow-throughs of reports. This third party should be in charge of information, so if a person were to request for more information, by having a third party, this means that there won't be any more bounced calls or operators who can't give you any updates on the files that you've made. The last thing I'm going to talk about in things that need to be done to help reform police racism and brutality is changing police culture, but this is one of the most difficult things that we need to do. Because police culture can't be pushed for entirely by the hands of just our community. But when we talk about changing police culture, this means establishing a board certificate with a minimum education and training requirements that police must go through to get a police license. And even if they have a police license, there should be an investigating body that can revoke these licenses. This is something that needs to happen because the amount of training that happens in North America compared to different parts of the world is very small. Next, in changing police culture, the idea of absolute necessity needs to be pushed for more. An officer needs to fear for their immediate life before they use lethal force, and this doctrine of I fear for my life needs to be instilled and encouraged before you reach for a gun or a taser, there needs to be de-escalation skills taught to the police officers. So before there's any use of excessive force, there must be de-escalation tactics used beforehand. Along with pushing an absolute necessity doctrine, there needs to be a newly created and updated guideline defining the types of force that can be used to respond to specific situations. So even if there are more lethal tactics that are taught in police training, it needs to be attached to specific circumstances. For example, there was a gentleman in Canada and their family decided to call the police for help because their family member was suffering from a schizophrenic attack and they needed help just de-escalating and helping this man calm down. And they specifically told the police officers not to come in with a gun. They explained this man's mental state and they said, do not scare him, it will make things worse. We don't want him shot, we just need help calming him down. And despite this being what they asked for over the phone, police officers came in with a gun, they came in with excessive force and they shot this man dead. And the only crime this gentleman had was having a mental illness. And that shouldn't be something to be shot for, especially in the confines of his own home. So by teaching different types of force attached to different situations, it prevents these situations from happening. Police officers should be trained in how to deal with different patients in different mental states. The next thing that needs to be pushed in changing police culture is requiring officers to report all uses of force or attempted uses of force. By making this change, this discourages initial perpetrators from using excessive amounts of force that isn't necessary for that situation. If those officers know that what they're doing is 1, being filmed by body cams, and 2, what they do has to be filed and reported, it discourages them from doing something they're not supposed to. The next thing that needs to happen in changing police culture is all of these police officers need to go through specific racial discriminatory education with an ongoing psychological test that they are required to pass. By implementing this sort of education, it makes sure that officers don't have an excuse not to understand these situations, and they don't have an excuse not to understand racial discrimination. So if they do act out in situations that is discriminatory, they're held more accountable because they don't have an excuse not to know what they did was wrong. And the last thing that I'm going to talk about in changing police culture, but probably one of the most important things that needs to be pushed for, is establishing a duty by officers to intervene if one of their colleagues is using excessive amounts of force. By pushing for this action, it ensures that instances like George Floyd don't happen as often. Because as we saw, one officer was doing the killing and the rest of them were just watching. But if you're just a bystander and you're not going to do anything, you're equally as guilty for the instance that happened because you didn't stop it when you had the chance to stop it. By having this duty, it gets rid of blue lighting. There's no more officers standing up for officers just because they're police officers and they belong to a sort of gang where they're not allowed to snitch and they have to support each other. I know that this list wasn't the longest and there's a lot more that can be done to help reform police brutality and racism. But the things that I decided to speak on are the things that are most easily done as of right now and what we can do as a community, because these are hard steps to be taking and it's really hard to unify a group of people and get all of these people to work towards a common good. But there is research that has been done towards things that needs to happen in police reform. Just none of those things are being taken seriously by police departments because this means that they don't get the funding that they want. This means that they don't get the pension that they want. And this means that they don't get to be the bully that they've wanted to be. So I really hope you guys take the time to actually call your local politicians or email them and let them know what bill you don't agree with. Let them know what changes or where their money is going is something that you don't agree with. And when you see a petition come up to stop one of those things from happening, you need to sign those petitions because those are one of the only ways to have your voice taken action. So yeah, again, I'll leave all of the research links I've used in the description down below, so I hope you guys do a little bit more reading into this. And there's just one more video to this series. The next video is going to be the last one. thanks for tuning in. If you guys like what I'm doing or think what I'm saying is important, please like the video and share the video. Again, like I mentioned previously, I just want to share these important stories and the things that we need to know to help fix these issues. And thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.